In 1921, Frank Lloyd Wright built the Hollywood house for Aline Barnsdall, a wealthy patron of living arts. She liked hollyhocks, so he took that plant as the theme for the decoration. It was his intention in this building to utilize the feeling and motives of the southwestern part of the United States. It is a unique home because its character might be called American Indian. Not literally so, but it has the Southwest decor found in the works of the Aboriginal California man. The masses of the structure are like the mesa lands, and the emotional impression is what you might get out of the long terraces, the natural formations of the desert country. It's southwestern USA. The home of Dr. Storer was the first building made in textured cement block construction. Frank Lloyd Wright developed the technique of patterning the uninteresting cementitious material to make it fascinating in shadow play. He introduced for the first time texture on the face of the concrete block. The house is developed on a 16-inch module. Everything is laid out in 16, 8, or 4-inch units. Dies were made for the face of the blocks, and then they were architecturally detailed. This house is actually constructed right out of the soil on which it stands. Whereas the original Indian living in this area used adobe blocks, this house was built with cement blocks of decomposed granite dug from the foundations. The retaining walls are extremely light, having a 1.5-inch face thickness and a 2-inch concrete core. These are reinforced and tied back with beams into the earth itself. The front wall is over 30 feet high, with just a thin shell on the outside. Frank Lloyd Wright is unique because he combines a canny sense of engineering values with a poetic, imaginative, and creative output of new building forms. Here we find poet and engineer interrelated in perfect harmony to serve our needs. This project was based on a wholly new constructive and remarkably effective engineering principle. Thin concrete blocks stitched together with steel thread to make a supporting, thrust-resisting fabric. This was one of the first buildings in which the 30-60 degree angle was used throughout, instead of the old 90-degree square angle corners. When civilization first appeared among men, their buildings were quickly caught in the trap of square angle geometry. It was the Egyptian land surveyors who began the cult of the cube and the pyramid. Later, in Rome, the engineers who built bridges became the most important men of the state. Draftsmen with straight-edge rulers and circle-making compasses set up a kind of planning which governed buildings, so as to make them serve as slaves rather than as brothers at work. Wright was almost the first to free architecture from the blight of T-square and drawing board. He thought of buildings as means to enclose useful three-dimensional space. He treats the outside walls as enclosing screens, and they move in 30 and 60 degree developments. Thus, there is never a tight 90-degree corner. An internal square always moves toward an open angle. It keeps moving open, open, open all the time. Frank Lloyd Wright has a whole series of houses built in this way, all with a sense of spaciousness that one cannot get with square angle planning. It was he who began to loosen the shackles of a potentially willing and cooperative architecture by bringing his expanding building idea to rest against walls set at an angle of 1 to 2. This new way of containing the working insides of a building opened up the dead and useless old-fashioned corners. He compelled the drawing and its blueprint to serve the inner urge of organized space as it grew and expanded in harmony with environment and purpose. With a plan orchestration of 30-degree and 60-degree angles, Frank Lloyd Wright freed the architecture of the box. This is a very good example of cantilever construction. It was built for an engineer in one of the airplane factories. He liked the sense of spaciousness which the flying wing gave to the small crowded bank on which it was built. Wright was the first to make any considerable use of cantilever structure in building, and perhaps more important than all else, to insist on reducing the mass weight of buildings. He put stationary buildings together like ships and planes, for after all it is rather a ridiculous paradox that the structures which must withstand the shocks of swift travel through storms of wind and water are successfully built with so much less material than the buildings which rest quietly on land and avoid such hazards. Our building laws penalize heavily the dwellings and factories which are slowly assembled on their massive foundations, but are unconcerned about the hotel and its 50 guests which fly overhead and alight on a nearby airport in a matter of seconds.